like to just read one short paragraph from that and just make sure that it's accurate, and then I'd like to ask you a question about it. The paragraph reads, I'm sorry. In fact, the Palestinians have indeed long been practitioners of civil disobedience from the revolt in 1936 to the first intifada in the late 1980s and right up to the present day. Palestinians are, in fact, proud of their tradition of nonviolent resistance. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I'm not an expert on the Middle East. I'm not an expert like you, but I remember way back when, in the late 1960s, living through the period when we had all the skyjackings going on, the 1972 Munich Olympics massacre. I was actually living in Italy in the 1980s when the airports in Rome and Vienna were simultaneously struck by terrorists. I was also there at the time of the Achille Lauro, when an elderly Jewish American man named Leon Klinghoffer was thrown overboard in his wheelchair. And of course, in more recent years, we have the blowing up of the buses, the pizza parlors, and more recently, the rocket launching into Israel from Gaza. As far as 1936 revolt is concerned, I'm not an expert on that. I'm not going to try and argue about how peaceful or nonviolent that was. But one of the main figures in that, as you certainly know, was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Al-Husseini. He was a rabid anti-Semite. He incited people to violence against Jews. And during World War I, of course, he had to leave. The British chased him out in 1937. In World War II, I said World War I meant World War II. He was in Berlin, living in Berlin as a guest of Adolf Hitler. During that time, he was making radio broadcasts from Berlin to countries in the Middle East, urging people to rise up and drive out the Jews. In addition, he also helped organize an SS company or battalion in Bosnia, which was implicit and which actually participated in the Holocaust of the Jews during World War II. So, okay, I'll get to my question. I'm sorry, it's a long one, I apologize. So, in light of all that, I just wonder, how do you reconcile this claim of a tradition of nonviolence? Maybe you can sort that out for me. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So this is very much from the school of Dershowitz propaganda, and this citation of Husseini, the Mufti, has become increasingly commonplace. Now, quite interestingly, photos of the Grand Mufti were actually circulated by the Israeli Foreign Ministry on Lieberman's suggestion at a time when Israel was under pressure for construction in the settlements, right? I mean, what you might think has this got to do with anything? Well, I mean, there's also, of course, a strategic purpose in trying to link the Grand Mufti, the Palestinians, to the Holocaust, right? Because that's part of justifying the Nakba as well, if you can try and connect the two. Now, for example, of course, I mean, you know, I've got no truck with alliances, you know, with Nazis in the instance you gave. What happened across the global south was that there were often self-determination movements, like in India, for example, that sought to make or sound out alliances with powers that actually opposed the powers occupying them. In the case of India, that was Britain. Members of Gandhi's party also went to Nazi Germany at the time to have a meeting about that. Interestingly, during World War II, the German army, tried to recruit in Palestine and got about 1,300 volunteers. The British army, fighting the Nazis, also tried to recruit and got 9,000 volunteers from the Palestinian people. But there's some bigger points here, of course, as well. I personally condemn outright the killing of innocent civilians, as I'm sure you also condemn outright Israel's killing of Palestinian civilians. And you've got to ask yourself, well, where is the root of the violence? And just bear with me while it's people reading out stuff I've written tonight, so I'm going to do the same. So this is from Jabotinsky, one of the key Zionist leaders in the pre-state days. And this is from an essay he wrote in 1923. Zionist colonization, even the most restricted, must either be terminated or carried out in defiance of the will of the native population. Why? He goes on, because history shows that every indigenous people will resist alien settlers. And they were very clear about that at the time. Of course, you know, like the Hasbara stuff has got to get more sophisticated in 2010, and it's all about other things to do with, you know, amazing rights and all this stuff. But in those days, they were very clear about what was going on and what it would need to take to do it. And simply put, as Jabotinsky himself said, people resist colonization, okay? And I can personally condemn the method of targeting innocent civilians, but we need to be pretty clear about where the root cause of that kind of stuff is. And Jewish Israelis will be safer, along with Palestinians, obviously, when there is an end to the system of domination that is the root cause of the conflict.
I just wanted to thank you for giving your presentation this evening, and I myself was given the opportunity to go to the region this summer and see for myself the effects of occupation. And so my question is that, when you hear in the news and the media, I guess the peace talks that are going on, and they talk about the 67 borders, I was wondering why the thought of, I guess, or at least talks of returning to 48 borders is never entertained.
Okay, well, there's kind of several things that you could kind of point to in this question. Just to hop back to this this map here, and of course, if you've been to the the West Bank as recently as this summer, then you would have seen on the ground the kind of the microscale of this bigger picture, which is, as I was talking about and showing some examples, the way in which Israel's fragmented the territory. Now, the reason why people are starting to say, well, not starting to say, this actually goes back quite a long way, but the reason why more people are saying this nowadays, that the idea of a two-state solution following the 67 borders is not possible, is quite simply because of the creation by Israel of so-called facts on the ground since 1967. Otherwise, as I pointed out here, this is patently not a state about to emerge, never mind, of course, the disconnection between the West Bank and the besieged Gaza Strip too. So, the mainstream peace discourse is, of course, very much based on the idea of a so-called two-state solution for a long history of reasons. But this is increasingly being seen as bankrupt by people. And actually, I corrected myself there because it isn't a new thought. I remember researching something else recently, and there was an op-ed in the New York Times in the 80s by somebody saying time is running out on the two-state solution in the 80s. And he was simply saying that from observing the colonization of East Jerusalem and the West Bank on the ground. Now imagine you jump forward to 2010 and what's happening. The official peace process, if you look at it as a structure and a series of agreements, you can maybe date it back about 20 years to Madrid in 91 and Oslo. 20 years. Hasn't managed to realise basic fundamental Palestinian rights, let alone, of course, independence in that sense. So the kind of tone or inclination of the question is saying, why aren't people talking about that? Well, my position would be people should be talking about that. Not just because of the fact that Israel's created these facts on the ground, of course, but also because then you're going to start to address the issues I looked at in the beginning section of examples, which relate to Palestinian citizens inside Israel, which relate to the rights of the refugees too. So it's, in my opinion, it's going to be a stage now, and we're going into maybe, who knows the time scale, but we're entering a stage now, an interesting stage of transition, where even the elites, Palestinian elites, Israeli elites, foreign policy elites, establishment elites in Washington, Europe, etc., who have invested so much in this official peace process, are starting to say remarks and see things as not going in that direction, and need for a rethink.
So I want to mention a few things quickly. One in relation to the earlier comment. I don't know if you're aware of this, but just less than a month ago, this past month, the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research surveyed over 1,200 Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. And one of the questions that they asked was, do you support armed conflict or armed conflict against Israeli civilians inside of Israel? Not the IDF, not settlers, Israeli civilians inside of Israel. 49% say yes. That's 2 out of 4 million. And I think that's a very important point to bring up. And as you were saying, you're talking about colonialism, you're talking about occupation, but when we talk about obstacles to peace and barriers to peace, and we realize that while the PA has sovereignty, Palestinian Authority has sovereignty over much, the 60%, or the part that areas A and B, and area C was part of the Oslo Accords in '93. That was not something that Israel was violating. They're just going along the Oslo Accords. They said you can have area C for security reasons. And so I think a lot of what you said, there's this element of Arab rejectionism, which did date back to Al Husseini in 21 and onwards, and the many Arab massacres, many more Arab massacres on Jewish civilians, which prompted the creation of these militant, groups to have to try to protect the Jewish civilians. And as that's continued to go on, and especially it's been really bad, we have a whole generation, 93, 94, when the PA was given control of the media and being able to say, and able to brainwash these people. And when in 2000, Arafat was offered everything except for one thing. The right, all right, shake your head, but they offered everything except for the right to return, and given offered $30 million in rejection, or just about everything. And he turned this down. That would have been it, done, boom, you wouldn't be here right now because they would have a state. So this Arab rejectionism, what more, this Arab rejectionism is a huge thing, and it's something we don't really address. And so I'm just curious your comments on that. Thanks.
Okay, as I'm sure you appreciate, there was quite a few different aspects of the question. I'll try and address some of them. Okay, if we go back to more at the beginning, and in terms of public support and public opinion relating to violence, as we were talking about, of course, we can also contextualize that with how many Jewish Israelis at the time supported the massacres in the Gaza Strip. And of course, the figure was consistently over 90%. And the Palestinian statistic can go back to the previous answer, which relates to what are people going to do and what they feel like under occupation. This question was almost, you can come to events like this and play Zionist propaganda bingo and kind of tick off the various things as they come along. So we've had the generous offering Camp David thing, which always comes up. Go back to the history books, you can read about it, you can read, the participants as well who took part. Obviously not the ones with a particular Zionist agenda, that wouldn't be so helpful. But you can read a little about it. It wasn't a concrete offer that he turned down. It wasn't something on paper that he was said, here's the offer, and accept or reject it. Okay? This idea of Arab rejectionism, it's a really strong Zionist idea, and as you pointed out, it goes right back to pre-state days. And you can ask yourself the question: if you're a Palestinian, would you accept the idea of creating a state for a different group of people in your homeland? Would you accept it? I don't think I would. I don't think many of us would accept that idea. So in that sense, yeah, Palestinians reject the idea that they should be subjugated. Palestinians reject the idea that they should be dispossessed to fulfill the Zionist political project in Palestine. Palestinian media, yeah, this is another classic, of course, and you can look at Israeli media and talk about how they're brainwashing Israelis, and Palestinian media reflects the Palestinian reality. I always find it amusing that there's this constant drumbeat, not in the UK, but maybe in the States, about how Palestinian children are taught to hate. You need to teach a child to hate when he's seen his father have his head blown off. You need to teach a child to hate when his home's been demolished. He's getting his lessons every day under occupation. And anyway, finally, on the PA, which clearly doesn't have any sovereignty in any meaningful sense of the word, the PA which actually collaborates with the Israeli occupation, which conducts hundreds of joint security operations inside the West Bank, right? The PA whose officials have to have Shin Bet protection as they travel around the West Bank. That's sovereignty. That's not the sovereignty I recognise anyway.
Question regarding your basic definition of apartheid. You spoke of the difference between, South African apartheid and Israeli apartheid. And then you used to define it certain terms from the UN. Those terms all involve racial discrimination. Every one of them. In other words, you put up to it one from the ICC and one from the other. Yet in your conclusion, you said one group over another group. What happened to the racial part of it? In your conclusion, you lost something along the way.
Okay.
And my second part of the question is, are Jews a separate racial group from Arabs or from Palestinians? Are we separate races, my question? Are Jews a race?
Yeah. Okay, well, the use of race is actually, of course, stemming from Israeli legislation and the Israeli framework itself, right? So when, for example, they're setting up the state,